What would you do if you were outnumbered nearly 4-1, staring down the most ruthless, heavily armored, and technologically advanced military machine the world had ever seen? Surrender? Flee? Or perhaps, if you were a military genius, you look at those impossible odds, look at the brutal terrain around you, and realize you have the enemy exactly where you want them. In the blistering heat of the Syrian desert in the year 636 AD, one man didn't just hold the line against the mighty Roman Empire. He completely dismantled it, piece by piece, in a masterclass of psychological warfare, tactical deception, and sheer, unbreakable human will. This is the story of the Battle of Yarmouk. It is a story not just of swords and shields, but of how adaptability and intelligence can crush brute force. It is the story of how the course of human history was permanently altered in just 6 days. To truly understand the sheer scale, the absolute madness of this clash, we have to rewind and look at the geopolitical chessboard of the early 7th century. For decades, the world had been locked in a devastating, exhausting superpower struggle between the two great titans of the age, the Byzantine Empire, which was the surviving, Greek-speaking eastern half of the Roman Empire, and the Sasanian Persian Empire. These two behemoths had beaten each other to a bloody pulp for over 20 years. Eventually, the Byzantine Emperor, Heraclius, emerged victorious. He was a brilliant, battle-hardened ruler who had brought the Persians to their knees, reclaiming lost territories and restoring the glory of Rome. By the 630s, Heraclius was sitting in his magnificent capital of Constantinople, likely thinking the worst was over. His empire was exhausted, its treasury was drained, and its armies were depleted, but the great enemy had been defeated. Peace, it seemed, was finally on the horizon. He was confident, powerful, and utterly unaware of the storm brewing in the deep sands of the Arabian Peninsula. While the Romans and Persians were busy destroying each other, something unprecedented was happening in Arabia. The tribes of the desert, historically fractured and fighting amongst themselves, had been united under a new banner, a new faith, and a new empire, the Rashidun Caliphate. These desert warriors were hardened by one of the most unforgiving environments on earth. They didn't have the heavy iron cataphract armor of the Romans, nor did they have the massive siege engines or the centuries of institutional military academies. But what they lacked in heavy equipment, they more than made up for in unparalleled mobility, fierce dedication, and a radically different way of waging war. When the Muslim forces began pushing north out of the Arabian desert and into the fertile lands of Syria and the Levant, Emperor Heraclius was initially dismissive. He thought these were mere desert raiders, a localized nuisance that a frontier garrison could easily brush aside. But city after city fell. Damascus, a jewel of the Roman East, was taken. The Roman border armies were being consistently outmaneuvered and destroyed. Heraclius realized this was no ordinary raid. This was an existential threat. And so, the emperor did what the Roman Empire does best when threatened. He mobilized a juggernaut. Heraclius raised a massive, multinational coalition army. It included elite Byzantine heavy infantry, heavily armored cavalry, Armenian mercenaries, Ghassanid Arab allies, and Slavic foot soldiers. Historical estimates vary, but it is widely accepted that the Roman force numbered anywhere from 80,000 to upwards of 150,000 men. It was a terrifying, glittering host of iron and steel, moving relentlessly southward to crush the invaders and push them back into the harsh sands of Arabia once and for all. Commanding this colossal force was Vahan, a highly experienced and cautious Roman general. He knew he had the numbers, the armor, and the logistical backing of a vast empire. All he needed was to force the enemy into a pitched, conventional battle where Roman discipline and sheer weight of numbers would grind the enemy to dust. Against this terrifying imperial war machine stood the Rashidun army, fielding barely 40,000 men. They were a light, agile force. By all standard military logic of the era, this should have been a massacre. The Roman army was a sledgehammer. The Muslim army was a scalpel, and in a head-to-head collision, the sledgehammer always wins. But the Romans made one fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. They were facing a commander who did not play by the conventional rules of war. They were facing Khalid ibn al-Walid. Khalid is one of those rare historical figures who seems almost mythical. He had fought in dozens of battles and had never lost a single one. Not one. He was known as the Sword of God. Khalid wasn't just a brave fighter. He was a psychological warfare expert and a grandmaster of tactical maneuvering. He knew exactly what the Romans wanted. He knew Vahan wanted a slow, grinding battle of attrition on wide open ground where Roman heavy infantry could form an impenetrable wall of shields and spears. So, Khalid refused to give it to them. When he saw the massive Roman host approaching, he ordered his scattered forces across Syria to retreat and consolidate. He pulled back, drawing the massive Roman army deeper and deeper south, stretching their supply lines, fatiguing their heavily armored soldiers under the scorching Syrian sun, and dictating the terms of engagement. Khalid finally halted his retreat and chose his battleground with terrifying precision. He chose the plains of Yarmouk. If you look at a topographical map of the Yarmouk region, you begin to understand Khalid's genius. It is a wide, flat plateau, which initially looked perfect to the Roman generals for deploying their massive army. But the plateau was deceptive. It was bordered on three sides by deep, plunging, treacherous ravines. The Yarmouk River gorge cut deep into the earth, creating sheer drops of hundreds of feet. There was only one primary escape route, a single bridge crossing a steep ravine known as the Wadi al-Raqqad. Khalid essentially placed his army with their backs to the desert, an environment they were perfectly comfortable retreating into if necessary, while positioning the Romans with their backs to a series of deadly cliffs and a single bottleneck exit. Think of it like a heavyweight boxer fighting a lightweight. If the lightweight stands in the center of the ring and trades punches with the giant, he dies. But if the lightweight uses the entire ring, exhausts the giant, lures him into the corner, and strikes only when the giant is off balance, the lightweight wins. Khalid turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. For weeks, the two armies sat encamped opposite each other, separated by a couple of miles of dusty plain. Vahan, the Roman commander, was cautious. He tried negotiations. He tried to buy the Muslims off, offering them gold and fine clothes if they would just take the wealth and go back to Arabia. Khalid famously rejected the offer, stating that his men loved death as much as the Romans loved life. The psychological war was already being won. Vahan realized there was no political way out. He had to destroy them. The battle finally commenced, and it did not last for a few hours. It lasted for 6 grueling, blood-soaked days. On day 1, the tension broke. The Roman champions stepped forward, challenging the Muslim champions to single combat, a traditional way to begin battles in antiquity. The Muslim duelists, highly skilled in this kind of individualized, fluid combat, dominated the exchanges, killing several high-ranking Roman officers. Humiliated and frustrated, Vahan ordered a general advance of a third of his infantry to test the Muslim lines. The clash of steel was deafening, but it was just a probing attack. At sunset, both sides pulled back to their camps. The real nightmare was about to begin. Day 2 is when the Roman sledgehammer truly swung. Vahan decided on a massive, coordinated assault. He ordered his army to attack at dawn, hoping to catch the Muslim forces off guard while they were performing their morning prayers. But Khalid, ever paranoid and ever prepared, had anticipated a surprise attack and had his men ready. The Romans focused their immense pressure on the flanks of the Muslim army, trying to envelop them. The Roman heavy cavalry, the elite of the empire, smashed into the Muslim right flank. The sheer weight and momentum of the armored horses and men were overwhelming. The Muslim right wing buckled under the terrifying pressure. The men began to fall back, pushed toward their own camp in a desperate, fighting retreat. It looked as though the Roman numbers were simply too much. But as the retreating Muslim soldiers stumbled backward into their encampment, they met a force even more terrifying than the Roman cavalry. They met their own wives and families. The women in the Muslim camp, armed with tent poles and stones, furiously struck out at their retreating husbands and brothers. They screamed at them, shaming them for abandoning the front lines, demanding they return to the fight and protect their honor. The psychological impact of this humiliation was profound. The men, fueled by shame and a renewed, desperate courage, turned around and threw themselves back into the meat grinder. But courage alone couldn't stop the Roman armor. Khalid needed tactical superiority. Here is where Khalid deployed his masterpiece, the Mobile Guard. The Mobile Guard was a specialized unit of around 4,000 elite, lightly armored veteran cavalrymen. They were Khalid's personal rapid response force. While the rest of the army was locked in brutal infantry combat, Khalid kept the Mobile Guard in reserve, watching the battlefield like a hawk. When he saw his right flank collapsing, he didn't send infantry to reinforce it. He personally led the Mobile Guard in a devastating, lightning-fast flanking charge right into the side of the Roman breakthrough. The Roman heavy cavalry, deeply engaged with the Muslim infantry and moving slowly due to their heavy armor, were suddenly hit on their unprotected flank by a swarm of fast, highly skilled horsemen. The Roman attack lost its momentum, shattered, and was pushed back to its starting lines. Khalid had saved the day, but the physical toll on both armies was immense. Day 3 was a near-exact repeat of the day before, but this time Vahan focused his fury on the Muslim left flank, hoping to find a weakness there. Again, the Roman numbers threatened to overwhelm the defenders. Again, the Muslim infantry was pushed back to their camps. Again, the women forced them back into the fray. And once again, Khalid and his Mobile Guard materialized out of the dust, hitting the Roman flank with surgical precision and forcing them to retreat. The battle was turning into a horrific meat grinder. The heat was oppressive. The dust choked the lungs of the soldiers. The sound of clashing metal, screaming horses, and dying men echoed across the plateau from sunrise to sunset. By day 4, the situation grew even more desperate. This day would become known in history as the Day of Lost Eyes. Vahan, frustrated by his inability to break the smaller army, unleashed his elite Armenian archers. These were some of the finest bowmen in the world. They advanced and unleashed a devastating, continuous volley of arrows that darkened the sky. The arrows rained down on the Muslim ranks with terrifying accuracy. Hundreds of Muslim soldiers lost their eyesight that day as arrows pierced their faces. The Muslim lines wavered dangerously under the relentless barrage. The Roman infantry and heavy cavalry surged forward, smelling blood. Both the left and right flanks of the Muslim army were being pushed back simultaneously. The center was dangerously exposed. It was the critical moment. If the lines broke now, it would be a total massacre. Khalid, seeing his entire army on the brink of annihilation, executed a series of insanely complex cavalry maneuvers. He split his Mobile Guard, sending one element to stabilize the left, while he took the other to stabilize the right. But he didn't just stop the Roman advance. He organized a localized counteroffensive. He ordered his men to push forward, engaging the Roman archers in close-quarters combat, where their bows were useless. It was a desperate, brutal, hand-to-hand brawl. By nightfall, the Muslim army had barely held on. They were battered, bleeding, and exhausted, but the line had not broken. Day 5 was eerily quiet. Vahan, realizing that 4 days of relentless, all-out assaults had failed to break an army a fraction of his size, was losing his nerve. His men were exhausted. The morale of the Roman troops, who had expected a quick and decisive victory, was plummeting. The psychological toll of fighting an enemy that simply refused to die was immense. Vahan sent an emissary to Khalid, proposing a truce for a few days so both sides could rest and negotiate. Khalid looked at the Roman emissary and saw exactly what was happening. He saw weakness. He saw a giant that was out of breath and losing its balance. Khalid flatly refused the truce. He knew that now was the time to strike. The Romans had spent 4 days trying to break him on their terms. Now he was going to break them on his. During the night between day 5 and day 6, Khalid made a move that would seal the fate of the Roman Empire in the Middle East. He gathered a small, elite detachment of cavalry and sent them on a wide, stealthy flanking maneuver under the cover of darkness. Their objective was not to attack the Roman camp. Their objective was a single, narrow bridge across the Wadi al-Raqqad ravine. It was the only viable escape route for the massive Roman army. Under the cover of night, Khalid's men silently overpowered the Roman guards at the bridge and took control of it. The Roman army was now completely boxed in. To their front was Khalid's army. To their left, right, and rear were sheer, impassable cliffs. The trap was set. Now, Khalid just needed to spring it. Then came day 6. The climax. As dawn broke, something extraordinary happened. The weather, which had been stagnant and hot, suddenly shifted. A massive, howling wind began to blow out of the south. A violent sandstorm swept across the plains of Yarmouk, blowing directly into the faces of the Roman soldiers. While the Romans were blinded, trying to shield their eyes from the biting sand, choking on the dust of the Syrian desert, Khalid unleashed hell. For the first time in the entire battle, Khalid did not wait to be attacked. He ordered a massive, coordinated, all-out offensive. He took his cavalry and completely bypassed the Roman infantry, swinging wide and smashing directly into the Roman cavalry. The Roman horsemen, blinded by the sandstorm and caught completely off guard by the sudden aggression of the Muslim army, panicked. They were routed, driven entirely off the battlefield, leaving the massive Roman infantry force completely exposed, without any cavalry support or protection on their flanks. Khalid then turned his entire cavalry force and brought them crashing down onto the left flank and rear of the Roman infantry. The giant wasn't just tired anymore. The giant was blind, paralyzed, and cornered. Panic, the most deadly contagion on any battlefield, swept through the Roman ranks. The tight, disciplined formations that were the hallmark of Roman military superiority disintegrated into a chaotic, terrifying mob of men trying to survive. The Roman soldiers broke ranks and ran. They ran away from the relentless assault of Khalid's men, trying to find safety, trying to find the road back to Damascus. They fled toward the Wadi al-Raqqad, expecting to find the bridge and the escape route. But when they got there, they didn't find safety. They found Khalid's cavalry detachment waiting for them, blocking the only way out. The slaughter that followed was apocalyptic. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers, blinded by the sandstorm, terrified, and pressed heavily by the advancing Muslim army, had nowhere to go. They were pushed backward, step by step, until they reached the edge of the ravines. Under the crushing pressure of their own panicked comrades pushing from the front, men and horses began to fall. They fell by the thousands, tumbling hundreds of feet down the sheer cliffs of the Yarmouk River gorge, crashing onto the jagged rocks below. The accounts of the time describe soldiers chained together to prevent routing, which only meant that when one man slipped over the edge, he dragged 10 of his brothers down into the abyss with him. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was an annihilation. By the time the sun set on the 6th day, the grand army of Emperor Heraclius, the supreme force of the Byzantine Empire, simply ceased to exist. Vahan, the Roman commander, was killed in the chaos. Over half of the massive Roman army lay dead on the plains or broken at the bottom of the ravines. The Muslim casualties were significant. Some estimates say up to 4,000 men, but they had achieved the impossible. They had utterly destroyed a force 3 to 4 times their size. When the news of the catastrophic defeat at Yarmouk reached Emperor Heraclius in the city of Antioch, he was devastated. He knew immediately what this meant. The treasury was empty. The army was gone. There were no more reserves to call upon. He had to abandon the entire region. It is said that as Heraclius boarded a ship to sail back to the safety of Constantinople, he looked back at the shores of the Levant and uttered a heartbreaking farewell. "Peace be with you, Syria. What a beautiful land you will be for the enemy." The Battle of Yarmouk didn't just end an army. It ended centuries of Roman dominance in the Middle East forever. Syria, the Levant, and soon Egypt would fall to the rapidly expanding caliphate. The geopolitical map of the world was redrawn in the blood and dust of that plateau, setting the stage for the borders and cultural divides we still see in the world today. The insight here, the profound lesson that echoes through the centuries, is that true military genius, true leadership, isn't about having the most resources, the heaviest armor, or the biggest budget. It's about leveraging your environment, understanding human psychology, and adapting so perfectly to the situation that your enemy's massive size actually becomes their biggest weakness. The Romans relied on their institutional arrogance. They believed that because they were Rome, because they had the numbers and the steel, they simply had to show up and grind the enemy down. Khalid ibn al-Walid proved that a nimble, adaptable mind, combined with an unshakable resolve, can shatter the strongest iron. He used the terrain, he used the weather, and most importantly, he used the Romans' own rigid tactics against them. He turned a battlefield into a trap and an army into a stampede. History is rarely written by the strongest. It is written by the most adaptable. It is written by those who can look at an impossible situation, look at an invincible enemy, and calmly figure out exactly where to place the fulcrum to tip the world upside down. If you find these echoes of the past as fascinating as I do, and if you want to continue exploring the hidden strategies, the brilliant minds, and the epic last stands that forged the world we live in, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're going to dive into a lot more of these untold stories together, analyzing the past to understand the present. Until next time, keep questioning history, and remember that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most impossible odds.